The flexibility piece is, I think, one of the key things to being able to be successful in life.
It also applies to yourself.
Absolutely.
Be flexible with yourself and be able to, realize when you're being too rigid and, I was going to do this and this and this, there's an openness that you need to have with yourself as well.
Any successful relationship starts with finding your center, the truth at the core of who you are. Only then can you develop the ability to truly connect with someone else. Concentric is about aligning with people who share a common center. This show gives you the tools and the skills to do just that through practical training, real life stories and examples, and in-depth interviews with people who have taken this journey and come out the other side better for it. Welcome to Concentric. We're glad you're here.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to episode number 4 of Concentric. I am absolutely loving this show. I selfishly am so happy to be doing it because I get to have these great discussions with Gary De Rodriguez, and it's so much fun. We have such a blast doing the show. And that's really what I wanted for this was to mirror those conversations that we have offline, right? And digging deep on some of these topics. It's just a blast. And I wanted to share that dynamic and really Gary's just tremendous insight on building relationships, again, whether personal or business, with all of you, with as many people as possible. Couple of things to look out for in this episode on flexibility. This was a topic I wanted to get into, and really how to approach any potentially rough conversation, maybe with an openness, a flexibility, to get the best possible outcome, while still standing firm in some non-negotiables. Right? Sometimes you can be as open as possible, but then there's not going to be a resolution there, and what to do in that situation when that's the case, but you still can walk away amicably. Gary gives you some really fantastic tools in here for this. All right, let's jump in. Welcome to episode number 4, everyone. My name is Jason Croft. I'm here with Gary De Rodriguez. Gary, how are you?
Hey, Jason. How are you, buddy?
Oh, doing great. Fun little topic here. Something I think we can all relate to. And like most of our topics, they apply not just to romantic relationships, but any relationship. Is the power of flexibility. Figuring out when to give, when to stand firm. And I think both are really important. Going through some of the trainings that I've seen you do, really emphasizing learning how to be a little more flexible in a relationship. And so I'd love to hear from you on the importance of that, on how to approach that, how to soften things. But then I also want to get into when to stand firm and when to not compromise on something.
I'll talk about the flexibility piece first, and then we'll go to more of the boundary piece. The flexibility piece is, I think, one of the key things to being able to be successful in life. I remember when I was a little boy, and I don't know why this happened because I ignored most of the things my father said to me. But this one thing he said was, son, he said, you can survive anything if you're flexible. And I was like, and for some reason, my little ears picked up. And I was like, I don't know why that's so important, but I know it's really important and I'm going to remember it. And I did remember it. And the thing that began to rest really securely in me was that when I would become fearful, I would become rigid. And when I became rigid, I would generally get myself into a variety of different problems, by my inflexibility and being able, first of all, to see things differently, to see things from another person's perspective, to be able to see it from a neutral perspective rather than a position of, I'm going to gather all my armaments and all my evidence, and I'm going to go to battle with this person to prove how right I am, how wrong they are, how smart I am, and how not smart they are. And when I avoided doing that latter strategy, and I went into, how is this person actually seeing this, and what are they seeing that I'm not seeing? And I began to start questioning how many different ways I could see a particular problem, knowing that oftentimes I had blinders on. We have to remember that we are only a collection of our learned experiences and what we've concluded about those learned experiences and chosen to believe about them. Then we start looking out of our window, of our eyes, at a world based upon what we've concluded was real, which has to be flawed regardless. And then we have this little reticular activating system at the base of our skulls, about that long, about the width of a pencil. And what that does, that little organ filters out contrary evidence to our belief systems and then goes, oh no, Gary, this is the only way that you can see it. And so what I've learned to do is stop, say, if I was to see it through this person's experience, through their collective experience, through what I'm not able to see, and do my very best to step inside of them and see from how they're actually experiencing me right now, I get a whole nother variety of data and information. If I give myself the flexibility to step to a neutral perspective, as if I was a coach between myself and the other person, then I get another completely different perspective. I've taught myself recently to rise up above and look at it more from a spiritual perspective, as if I could ascend above the complexities of the egos and look at it from a spiritual perspective.
I thought you meant like looking up and then so you can look down on people more. Like, is that?
Yeah. No. I mean,
that's how I approach it. That's it. No.
It's ascending to a higher way of looking at it. Not from a condescending way, but from a higher way of looking at it. When I'm able to do that one, then I get a whole other body of data and information. So what I know that is, if we take multiple perceptions, have the flexibility to force ourselves out of all of our evidence and all of our convinced that we're rightness out of that equation, and choose to take multiple perceptual positions of something, we actually start to see things differently. And that is the most important part of having flexibility.
How do you do that in the moment? How do you find yourself triggered in the moment? How do you step back and sort of go through that process of having this perspective?
Well, there's a number of different ways. One way is when you enter any kind of a conversation with someone where you have a sense that something can go awry. Because we generally have a sense. We're generally not completely blindsided. We generally have a sense. Yeah. You go in knowing what your outcome is. So you go in with the set outcome for the engagement and conversation. Like, I want to create resolution to XYZ, or I want to practice perceptual flexibility or behavioral flexibility. So no matter what comes up, I'm going to choose to pause, not respond immediately, give it thoughtfulness before I open my mouth and insert foot. So I'm going to do something that's going to break the pattern that I've already had, or that I've always had. So when you go in with a predetermined outcome for what you want to accomplish from the conversation, then it becomes something more of, it becomes more manageable. I'm not saying that we don't get triggered emotionally. Sometimes we absolutely do. But if we go in with a perception that I'm going to force myself to look at me through their eyes, look at it from a neutral perspective, and if it's within your belief system, rise up to a spiritual perspective, look at it from that. You can do it very, very fast. then you
Yeah.
stop that reactiveness.
So let's dig into the subtleties a little bit, though, too, because going into it with a determined outcome can be construed as opposite of open and flexible, right? And it sounds like what you're saying is have this outcome, not necessarily like this person's going to do this, but a feeling outcome. But then the how is exactly what you're open to. Like, let's figure out how we're going to.
Right. That's exactly right. The bottom line is that we have to begin to start looking at. You don't go in with an outcome for the conversation's turnout, what you want to get from that person. You want to go in with the outcome to challenge yourself to be flexible in that moment by taking multiple perceptual positions, and then have the ultimate flexibility is how well you can begin to pivot in the conversation based upon the data that you have gotten. So when you go in with that particular outcome, not like I want Mary to, buy 4 pounds of my cookie dough, and that's my outcome. But no, an outcome on like, I want to have a conversation with Mary and I want to come to an amenable agreement, and I want to be able to see it from her eyes, from a neutral perspective eyes, to make sure I'm not missing anything, from a spiritual perspective, to additionally give me more information. And so that's my outcome. So when we begin to start looking at how much can I lead in, and I don't mean lead the conversation, but lead myself in a conversation that could become heated, how much can I practice my own self-leadership in this particular environment right now? And that would be my outcome. So thank you for that clarification, because that was a great point. It's not an outcome for the conversation. It's an outcome of who you're going to be in the conversation.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you want to take a deep dive into the concepts Gary is talking about here and so much more, I've got something for you. From time to time on the show, you may hear us talk about Gary's course, Creating Incredible Relationships. This course is the culmination of Gary's 35 years worth of seminars, one-on-one training, and transforming the lives of over 11,000 people on 4 different continents. To learn how to build alignment and, heck, just get along with others sometimes, we all require skills that are not commonly known and are not out there in the relationship development space. We need help. That's why Gary put this course together. The content in it is powerful and comprehensive. But just like we've done with this show, it's put together in a way that's easily consumable and quickly implemented. To gain the ability to take every relationship you have or want to have to the next level, go to garyscourse.com and see how to get started. Now, back to the show.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And this gets into sort of that other half of this conversation, which is it's okay that you've approached it in that situation. You've gone through all this. You've taken in all this data and understanding from different perspectives. But then it's still, nope.
Yeah.
This is not okay. See ya. But now your reaction to that is way different, way less emotional. It's data instead of, screaming
Personal.
emotion, right?
Yeah. And see, the most important thing is were you congruent to you during that conversation? Many times people will have a flaw in a relationship. They'll have a blowout. But what the actual damage is the next 48 to 2 weeks that you're running in your head how much you can't stand the person, what the person did to you, and and you're running this big narrative, and you go and you tell 4 or 5 different people, and then they talk about the narrative. And before you know it, you have extended that 15 minutes of being uncomfortable or even pain, and you've extended it over a 2-week period of time that you never get over. Right. That is where the damage happens. So for us to be able to leave a conversation going, I showed up aligned to my values, aligned to my own self-leadership, and I caused no harm. And I also drew firm boundaries because that's not the best thing that I know will be the best thing for me long term. So, or even for the other person long term. You don't want to ever do an agreement where the other person loses and you win, because our subconscious mind, highly moral being, it knows when you misbehave. Everybody else can think you're fabulous, but you know, and that's the most important person to know, that you were misaligned, that you took advantage, that you did something that was really quite misaligned to who you were striving to be. Now, these are really, really important aspects. Again, every relationship is about a relationship to yourself. The way you show up is a reflection of how far you've come. Always in relationships, it's the acid test for what your own leadership is and what your own self-leadership is. Your own awareness, your own people intelligence and emotional intelligence. You test yourself in every relationship and how you show up and how you behave. So if we're ever going to graduate to another level of our self-actualization as leaders, then we want to be able to welcome challenging conversations and handle it masterfully by that art of flexibility, by gathering multiple perceptual positions, not just one, being able to question, be able to ask questions for clarification, and then begin to be able to move to whether this is something I can agree to or something that I cannot agree to. And if I can't agree to it, you can always leave or exit a conversation and simply say, I'm going to require to gather some more information, think about it a little bit more, and let's reconvene and continue this conversation after we both have some time to digest what our positions have been. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And the most amazing thing that happens as well is when you approach these potentially heated or contentious conversations with this openness, this flexible perspective and mindset, the other person automatically or very quickly calms, right?
Well,
they're not.
The whole art of rapport.
Yeah. They're not
it's
triggering.
The whole art of rapport. The person, people will generally model another individual, the energy that you bring, the tone, tempo of your voice, your physicality, your body position, which we'll speak about at some point in detail. But all that is about getting rapport. And this becomes a really important aspect of any kind of relationship, any conversation that's a critical conversation, either business or personal. One of the things I think is important to kind of recognize is that when we are establishing rapport and we know we're going into a conversation that could go right or left, but not down the middle, I love to do this. Before we even start, I will say to the other person, let's establish something that you and I both want to achieve, that we can both agree to. That would be a win for you and for me. We obviously have different points of view, but let's see what we can agree to of what we want to create as our common goal and our common outcome for the conversation. And it may be at a very high level, like understanding or mutual understanding, or it could be resolution to X, Y, and Z, which may or may not happen during that conversation. But you'll always get more information, so another conversation can happen where maybe you can make more movement. But to begin the conversation with some sort of an established, mutually agreed to outcome that you both desire to achieve, that then gives you a place to negotiate from, a place of opportunity to challenge. Like if you're in a conversation, you're talking about selling a car, and then the person you're speaking to goes, well, back in 1962, you said blah, 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 blah to me, and I never got over it. You can always say, that's a little sideways from the outcome that we mutually agreed to. So we're going to come back to the topic. So there's always that kind of relevancy challenge that we can bring. So that's another tool that people can actually use. But the flexibility piece is super important. And we have to remember this one thing. As soon as the As soon as our reptilian brain clicks in and dumps cortisol and adrenaline throughout our bodies, what that does is it shuts down the frontal lobes and we go stupid. We cannot think. So if you find yourself in a conversation, if you don't set this all up and you find yourself in a conversation where that adrenaline and that cortisol is coursing through your veins, it's best to just reschedule, because quite frankly, you're going to go stupid and you're going to say something that's over emotional. And before you know it, you're going to do more harm than good. So all that is part of this. Remember, it's always about flexibility. It's always about knowing yourself, the relationship with yourself. And I know we haven't gotten to values yet, but it is about staying aligned to your own values so that you know that whatever decision or course of action you choose to take, you're congruent with you. And then you can feel good about it.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's great place to wrap up here. Super powerful. And I'll leave simply with, and maybe this is a deeper topic for another time, but, for everyone out there, remember, that flexibility, it also applies to yourself.
Absolutely.
Be flexible with yourself and be able to, realize when you're being too rigid and, I was going to do this and this and this, there's an openness that you need to have with yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. Gary, fantastic as always. See you next time.
Talk to you later, my friend.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Concentric. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd certainly like a great review from you on your favorite podcasting platform. But more than that, what really makes a difference to a show like ours is a recommendation to someone who would love this show like you do. Word of mouth referrals to your network and your podcast devouring friends is incredibly helpful to the growth of this show. For episode links and info, go to concentricshow.com. Thank you so much, and remember to keep building alignment to build a better life.